You're staring at that red receipt, and the silence is starting to feel like a personal insult. An hour passes, then 2. Your pulse rises because your brain has already reached a verdict. They're bored, they're angry, or they've finally realized you aren't worth their time. But what if that feeling of certainty is actually a structural failure of your mind? If you want to stop letting the absence of a message control your emotional reality, hit the like button and subscribe. It's how these diagnostic reports keep running. The problem isn't the quiet. The problem is that your brain is incapable of letting a void stay empty. Think about the last time a colleague didn't acknowledge you in the hallway, or a partner went unusually silent during dinner. In a perfectly calibrated system, you would register this as missing information and simply wait for more data. But your mind doesn't wait. It hates a vacuum. To your internal architecture, uncertainty feels like a predator hiding in tall grass. And when your brain senses that kind of threat, it doesn't pause, it improvises. It performs an emergency fill. It takes that blank space and populates it with a story, usually the darkest one available. I must have said something wrong. They're judging me right now. They're pulling away. And here's the trap. You aren't reacting to their behavior. You're reacting to a fiction your mind just wrote to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. That fiction doesn't stay internal. It changes you. Because you've labeled the silence as rejection, your energy shifts. You become guarded, you withdraw, or you send that frantic just checking in message that betrays your anxiety. You're fighting a war against a ghost. You're treating a lack of signal as if it were a clear, aggressive statement of intent. The sting you feel is real, but its source is a projection. You're suffering because your internal system would rather give you a terrifying answer than leave a question mark on the table. And modern life has made this glitch far worse. We live in an age where silence has been amplified by technology. Every scene indicator and online status has trained your brain to expect constant feedback. When that stream stops, the glitch activates at full force. We've forgotten that silence is the natural state of the world, and that most of the time it contains absolutely no information about us. So now you're navigating relationships with a radar that interprets every empty patch of sky as a threat. You think you're being socially intuitive, but you're really just being haunted by your own need for a narrative. You've turned a quiet room into a courtroom where you are already being found guilty. The tragedy of this error is that it's invisible. You don't feel like you're guessing. You feel like you're reading between the lines. You trust your gut, not realizing that your gut is simply reacting to silence it doesn't know how to process. This isn't a personality flaw. It's a survival mechanism that has gone feral in a hyper-connected world. Your brain would rather you be wrong and paranoid than right and vulnerable. It chooses the safe story, the negative one, because that's the one that keeps you alert. But at what cost? You're burning through your life defending yourself against insults that were never spoken and reacting to messages that were never sent.
The reason your brain turns a blank screen into a personal attack is rooted in a real cognitive bias called hostile attribution bias, the tendency to assume negative intent in others when their behavior is unclear or neutral. To your neural architecture, silence isn't just a lack of sound. It's an empty space where a threat could be hiding. In moments of uncertainty, your mind doesn't ask what is most likely. It asks what is safest if I'm wrong. In human interaction, a null signal, no reply, no expression, no feedback, is processed by your system as potential danger. An unanswered message feels less like missing data and more like an exposed flank. This is amplified by something psychologists call ambiguity aversion. Your mind hates uncertainty more than it hates bad news. When it encounters a social vacuum, it can't just sit there. It needs a story. So your internal interpreter goes to work. And because of the way your hardware is wired, it defaults to the worst-case explanation. If you assume the silence means they're busy, you might miss a threat. If you assume it means they're upset, you stay alert, you brace, you prepare. Your brain chooses the darker story because it keeps you on guard. Here, we'll call this specific failure the ambiguity error. It's the moment your mind stops observing and starts inventing. The system can't tell the difference between no data and bad news, so it treats both as the same thing. And modern life makes this far worse. In a world saturated with microsignals, likes, replies, status indicators, your social radar has been recalibrated to expect constant feedback. When that stream pauses, the absence itself starts to feel like a message, but it isn't one. You're not receiving information, you're projecting. Your mind takes your own insecurities and casts them into the silence of the other person. You aren't reading their mind, you're reading your own shadow. This error is computationally cheap. It's far easier for your brain to load a familiar script of rejection than to hold the open space of, I don't know. The system would rather be certain about being unwanted than uncertain about being liked. That's why you feel that sudden surge of clarity when you decide someone is upset with you. That feeling isn't insight, it's relief. The loop is closed, the unknown is gone. You traded uncertainty for a painful story that at least feels solid. And once that story exists, your mind starts collecting evidence. You replay the last conversation. You reinterpret a neutral phrase. You remember a tone that may never have existed. The error feeds itself. You've taken a neutral void and turned it into a case file for a crime that hasn't been committed. Your body reacts as if a threat is real. Cortisol rises, muscles tense, distance grows. You are burning a bridge because you're afraid of a fire that isn't there. The system is designed this way because in a dangerous world, a false alarm is cheap and a missed threat is fatal. But in the 21st century, where silence usually means a meeting, a commute, or a dead battery, this ancient logic becomes a liability. It makes you volatile, it makes you fragile, it makes you react to ghosts. You aren't being perceptive when you decode silence. You are watching a machine that has forgotten how to say, I don't have enough data to form a story. To stop the system from hallucinating threats, you have to stop treating your brain's output as fact and start treating it as a flawed hypothesis. The first and most critical fix is the Null-Signal Rule. You need to repeat this to yourself like a mantra. Silence contains no data. You must manually break the equation in your head that says silence equals message. When you find yourself spinning a story about why someone hasn't responded, interrupt the narrative and acknowledge the objective truth. You have zero information. You are staring at a blank space. Any meaning you find there is something you brought into the room. By labeling silence as null, you strip the ambiguity error of its power to trigger your stress response. The second layer of the patch is the triple hypothesis check. Your brain is lazy. It wants to grab the first, scariest explanation and lock onto it. You have to force the system to work harder. Every time your mind generates a story of rejection, immediately produce 3 neutral alternatives. Maybe they're deep in a flow state at work. Maybe they saw the notification and got interrupted. Maybe they're exhausted and don't have the energy to engage. The goal isn't to believe these stories. It's to remind your brain that your fear is just one possibility among many.
This alone weakens the bias and restores balance. The final layer is the internal versus external audit. Ask, in the heat of the moment, am I actually reading the other person, or am I projecting my own current state? Most of the pain caused by silence doesn't come from the person on the other side. It comes from something already active inside you, looking for a place to land. If you're anxious that day, your mind will use the silence as proof. Not because it is proof, because it's available. When you recognize the source as internal, you stop blaming someone for a signal they never sent. You realize the rejection isn't happening out there. It's a simulation running in here. If you don't install these patches, you will live as a prisoner of other people's schedules and your own imagination. Volatile, reactive, exhausted by a world that isn't even trying to hurt you. Your peace of mind is too valuable to be held hostage by a missing text or a quiet afternoon. It's time to stop letting your brain fill the silence with ghosts. If this diagnostic report helped you recalibrate your social radar, synchronize with the network. Hit the like button and subscribe for your next update on the hidden faults of the human mind. Have you ever blown up a relationship over a silence that turned out to be nothing? Share your log in the comments. We're reading every entry. Stay awake. The system is always running.